The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweigh the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org radio, Global Alert News edition for February 20th, 2016. This show is broadcast on KQMS Saturday mornings, 6 p.m. Pacific time. That broadcast goes throughout Northern California. This show is also reposted at geoengineeringwatch.org under the radio section. And it's important for those listening to the live broadcast in Northern California. Geoengineeringwatch.org is a data repository to try to sound the alarm on what we face as the human race, news that normal mainstream media is not telling us. Geoengineeringwatch.org does not sell anything. We're non-political. Simply want to raise awareness on challenges that will affect and are affecting all of us right now and that are going to get much worse very quickly. So again, the effort of this show is to try to point out to the population what they're not being told. The kind of news on this show you won't hear in many places. And why can we say and address different issues than other shows can? Because there are no commercials on this show. It's paid for out of pocket. And the purpose in that is so that we have no one dictating what is said on this show. My thanks to KQMS for allowing this show to be broadcast through their facility. And before I get into dire news, and we have no shortage of it this week, we never do, but I want to point out at the beginning of the show this time and at the end, many people, when they hear this kind of news, because I get a lot of blowback all the time about covering doom and gloom and leaving people in a catatonic state where they don't know how to respond. And I always, at the end of every broadcast and every radio program that I am interviewed on, every post I do, I always state what we can, should, and must do to help change the direction that we're currently on. But I know by the time people have heard too much dire news, perhaps they don't hear that important message at the end. So I'm going to give it at the beginning. No matter how bad things get, we have a responsibility, in fact, an obligation to do everything we can to change course. And it can look darkest before the dawn. And no matter what, at best, we face very difficult and unimaginable challenges in front of us. But an example I've used before, and this is what always restrains me from candy coating anything. It's not in my nature. I can't do it. Because it's not helpful or healthy to mask or gloss over reality. Not healthy. And if we're crossing a 6-lane freeway at rush hour in the fog, and you're trying to run from one side to the other, would you want to face traffic, or would you just want to run across and keep your back to traffic just because you don't want to see what's coming? What's going to give you the best chance? What would give you the best odds of making it across that very dangerous path? We need to face issues head on, period. And everyone listening to this broadcast can do a tremendous amount of good if you simply put one foot in front of the other and start marching in this fight for the common good, and try. For every person you wake up and every person they wake up, and you do that by passing on credible data, by the way, not just your opinion, not just your fears, not just rants. Do it without fear, without trepidation. Do it logically, rationally. Pass on credible data if you want to wake people up. That's what it takes. And that involves first understanding a bit about what's going on yourself. That's part of the purpose of this show. People can do follow-up and verify anything, everything I say on this show on geoengineeringwatch.org or online. I welcome people to do that. I never ask anyone to believe anything I say. I want them to challenge everything I say. Do it, investigate. Now, this week is no different than any other as far as the corporate media and what they're telling you. Same mass distraction while the house burns down. Same theater. It could rerun every single week. The ludicrous election horse race with all these cast of characters that are carefully scripted and everyone thinking they have some say in the overall matter. You don't have any say. You haven't had any say for a very long time. This is all just a scripted theater to catch you up in it and make you think this time it'll be different. Anybody remember Barack Obama? Change we can believe in? Well, we had change all right, and about all of it in the wrong direction. It was no different with Bush or Clinton or anybody else before them, going back to perhaps Kennedy, and we saw what happened to him. So the same media mass distraction going on this week. So while we're watching that, and while some people are still buying into the lie that the economy is getting better, let me give you a few real headlines. I'm going to skip the corporate media nonsense headlines because they're all the same. Some star in Hollywood lost one of their shoes, or I don't, the kind of things that we see on the TV, I can only imagine what some outside intelligence would think if they were watching the human race with their biosphere literally imploding around them, and the kind of things we see on TV, the kind of programs people watch and become involved with is so far beyond reasonable or rational, one doesn't have the words. But here's a few real headlines from this last week. The banking turmoil spreads. Massive banking crisis brewing in Singapore. These are all from mainstream sources, by the way, which can't hide this kind of headline any longer. So there are things that we can find on mainstream media once they become impossible to hide. That's the only time we see them, in fact. Just like the gas leak in Southern California. If they could have hidden that forever, you can bet they would have. Same with the oil leak in the Gulf of Mexico. Same with every other crime within the power structure. They hide it as long as they can. That ties into climate engineering as well, by the way. Another headline. I'm in awe at just how fast global trade is unraveling. Mainstream source. Another headline. Italian banks are circling the drain together. That's from a European source. Brazil's 5,500 bankruptcies in 2015 signal deeper credit crisis. Another headline. China must cut steel output deeper and faster. Another, China rebalancing in reverse. Non-performing loans jump 51% from 2014. That means people are failing. That means the credit house of cards is imploding. Consumer confidence crashes to 23-year low in Norway as growth grinds to a halt. Another headline, ECB in talks with Italy over buying bundles of bad loans. Several more headlines. Eurobond crisis returns as Germany pushes Euro sovereign debt bail-in clause. Here's one to remember. Another headline, 21 new numbers that show the global economy is absolutely imploding. Can't hide this much longer. Can't hide it. For many years, the smoke and mirrors has gone on, and people have bought into that because they want to continue in a lifestyle of taking much more than we give back. Most people don't want to hear that, and I realize that. I realize it's not popular when I say something like that. Perhaps I'll lose viewers on our Facebook pages or website, and I can't help that. I simply have to say it how it is in the current paradigm of modern industrialized society, taking much, much, much more than they give back to the planet which supports our life. It's not going to continue, period. The sooner we realize that, the sooner we change directions, the more we may have left to salvage. Isn't that better than wishing for the party to go on a few more months at the cost of destroying everything and having nothing left to salvage? It's a bit like having a few ears of corn. Do you eat every single grain of corn at one sitting, or do you save some to plant so that you might have more? Which makes more sense? So we're faced with an imploding economic situation that, again, will be hard to hide for much longer. Other crises that are continuing, the refugee crisis, is rapidly expanding, and that's going to continue as well. But over that week in, week out, I'll continue to cover that. Many ramifications from that, and it will reach a critical point where it spirals completely out of control. And that perhaps is what the power structure wants to have happen, because they have certainly fueled this crisis from the beginning, going back a very long way. And this crisis provides a lot of cover for them, a lot of cover. It provides the basis in which they can hang so much around the threat from ISIS. ISIS, which is an organization that was, again, spawned, fueled, funded by the U.S. And ISIS continues to terrorize the world, as our mainstream media makes sure that we know that. And again, who helped create this group of insane radicals? And that's what they are. Short summaries on these weekly global issues that people need to keep in mind, because I have other major points to cover in a moment here. And NATO ally Turkey making it clear that they will attack anyone who attacks ISIS. A NATO ally defending the terrorist group that Western powers tell us we need to fear. And let's think about this again. I bring this up a lot because this really requires some rational examination. We have a group of radicals that drives around in fleets of Toyota pickup trucks that came from the Pentagon, by the way. Explain that one. No Air Force, no Navy, no major military hardware per se. How can they wreak such havoc unless they're allowed to do so? How can we possibly believe that all these major militaries working together can't immediately exterminate this threat? This is absolutely ridiculous. And I think people in our military, certainly they know this. They know that they're being held back, just like they were held back in Vietnam. How many times do we hear that from Vietnam? They weren't allowed to win. We shouldn't have been in Vietnam to begin with. Absolutely shouldn't have been there. The Gulf of Tonkin was a false flag. Historical fact. Look it up. Vietnam, in which 60,000 of our sons and daughters died needlessly in what amounts to simply tyranny from our own government at the top. And we never hear about the brutal events in countries where there are no current U.S. or Western power strategic interests, like Bahrain. Does anybody even know where Bahrain is? How many people are even familiar with that country and what's going on there? Total tyranny, absolute total tyranny. But the U.S. Navy has a base there, and that government is cooperating with that base, so we don't hear about what that government does to its people. Completely oppressing their people, just like Saudi Arabia. Just like Saudi Arabia, who we never hear anything about. Saudi Arabia, who's bombing hospitals in Yemen right now, and Yemen, in which 2 journalists were just killed. I'll get to that momentarily as well. So again, in summary, all the U.S. population hears about is what those in power want them to hear about. And how many times have I heard from people when they are unwilling to listen to the truth, their fallback card is, oh, you got that off the internet, as if that makes it untrue. The internet, in which you can get right at the source and not have it filter through something like Fox or CNN, which completely distorts any sort of reality. But yet, people who don't want the truth always have some certain mantra, you're a conspiracy theorist, or you got this off the internet, some little excuse out so that they can shut down, completely turn off any rational thought, and remain in their denial. That's a huge percentage of the U.S. population, populations around the globe, for example. And what about Boko Haram? How many people know of this terrorist group who's killed more than Al-Qaeda? Don't hear much about them, do we? Because the countries in which they're wreaking havoc are really of not strategic interest to the Western powers right now, so we don't hear anything about it. They could care less what Boko Haram does. What about the 800,000 people that were killed a decade and a half ago or more with machetes in Africa? Ethnic cleansing. We didn't hear much about that either, did we? Because there was no strategic interest for the Western powers. Total hypocrisy. Total hypocrisy. And the Western powers have always funded ruthless governments so long as those governments carry out the bidding of Western powers. Those in power have always funded both sides of conflicts. It's always been so. As I brought up in the past, let's take Prescott Bush for an example. And all those people that have Bush stickers on their cars still from the election so long ago now, and who think Bush was something spectacular, or those who think Obama was, or Clinton, or the rest. They're all the same. But look up Prescott Bush and find out what he was involved with. Funding the Third Reich. In fact, Congress shut down the institution that he was involved with in congressional hearings because they were funding both sides of the war. Business as usual. Look it up. Historical fact. So how do we have now Daddy Bush president, Junior Bush president, and now another one running for president? That's a democracy? By what definition is that a democracy? How do we have husband and wife running for president? This is a circus of insanity we live in, and the American public is all too willing so far to go along with it if they think somehow that will keep things going forward. It's not going to. It's what's going to bring things to a very horrible conclusion here in many ways very soon if we don't wake up. Now, I want to read something from Martin Luther King. 3 quotes that matter immensely for everyone to think about. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for what is right. A man dies when he refuses to stand up for justice. A man dies when he refuses to take a stand for that which is true. How many people are willing to follow that creed? And if we don't follow that creed, what is left? What is left of life that matters? How many men will sell their honor for a pittance? The only thing we own, our virtue, our honor. How many have sold it already? It'd be much easier to try to determine how many haven't. That number would be immensely small. Our society worships scientists. We're taught to worship scientists that have no regard for the overall picture. None. They're simply tools for the power structure. And I'm not against science if it's exercised in a manner that shows responsibility. And that is absolutely not the case. How many worship technology to go with that because they want all the modern conveniences, but they don't want to take into account the consequences to our children for the way that we have lived. And this is a fact. And I know this, everything I'm saying I know is very unpopular with many people because they want to believe if they could just elect this person or that person that matches their ideology, everything would be wonderful. Everything would be fine and we could just keep on looting, plundering, and pillaging the planet forever. Not reality. Not reality. And even the environmentalists, and I am one, to the gills. I've worked tirelessly on the land I have on the east side of Lake Shasta for years trying to restore habitat, which doesn't matter now because everything's dying because of climate engineering. Technology is killing everything we tried to do on the ground. Everything. Why would I worship technology when it's used in that manner? Why would I? Why should I? That I have to watch areas of forest where I bled, sweat, and cried restoring that forest. Literally bled. And to see it all die now, trees that are hundreds of years old, it tears my heart out. When I march into the forest, into the trailless wilderness areas where I have a canoe hidden in the forest, and I go across the Pitt River and I march into areas that, I trek into areas where there's no one. Trees 400 or 500 years old. There once was, only a few years ago, many bears there. So many that when I slept in those areas, I would have to surround where I sleep with dead branches so that I could hear anything if it's coming too close and be able to do something about it to frighten them off. The last time I had a bear very close at about 2 a.m, he was so hungry and perhaps so out of character that even firing several rounds at close range did not scare him away. He eventually went away. I would never shoot a bear in that circumstance unless I had absolutely no choice, and I did not have to fire any shots at this bear, but he was clearly behaving in a very unorthodox manner. And I've slept in the forest a lot alone. So I've watched all this change happen. It's profound. And this is what technology is doing. The technology that is behind climate engineering, solar radiation management, which is the epitome, the absolute epitome of human arrogance and insanity, to think that our scientists and the technology that is so run amok that we can actually engineer the climate, engineer Earth's life support systems, engineer our food, cross-gene mutation in our food intentionally. So this is where technology has led us so far. And back to the environmentalists who claim to be fighting the greatest battle of all, climate change, our disintegrating climate, and yet completely omitting the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all. Not the only factor. We have absolutely decimated our planet. Those who deny that are simply hiding from reality. But when we have environmental groups showing environmental films like Naomi Klein's new film that will not even bring up climate engineering, we have a lot of people in Northern California whom I know that are doing exactly that, having presentations on climate change and never even mentioning climate engineering. Total hypocrisy. Total hypocrisy. In fact, I've found people in the environmental movement to be the hardest to reach of all with the most important issue of all, because they really don't want the truth. They want to feel like they're doing something for the greater good, but they don't really want to be bothered with the most important, most dire issue. They don't want to be, and they all want to convince each other that they don't need to be. I hope that changes. I want to another subject from a man that I've recently contacted or connected with named Caesar Behlul in Australia. And this is where the work, this kind of work for the common good, I'm so grateful, has led me to so many people who care so much for the greater good. And it was a great honor to connect with Caesar Behlul. I hope I'm not mispronouncing his last name. Incredible individual, did some incredible videos about the order followers. Let's think about that term, the order followers, because that's how things get as bad as they are. Those who follow orders thoughtlessly, without conscience, that's why things are so bad. And Caesar did an outstanding job on 2 videos that you can watch on geoengineeringwatch.org, short videos, but very profound and very to the point, exposing the true core of the problem. There's always insane people who crave power at the top. But without order followers, they could never carry out the incredibly destructive things that they do. They couldn't do it. We need to consider that. Are you an order follower? Whoever's listening, whether you're in law enforcement, military, agencies, are you an order follower? I've repeated this in the past, or I've stated this. I was recently in a forest in Northern California on the east side of Lake Shasta with congressional reps. Congressional reps were Congressman Doug LaMalfa, by the way. I'll name names. With scientists from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, whom I know very well, have been in the field with many times, have worked with very closely for a number of years, with congressional reps and USDA soil scientists and biologists as well, looking at a hillside full of stone-dead trees, and I asked them, do you see forest decline? And they looked at the congressional reps, looked at each other and said, no. What do you do with that? I shook my head and walked away. What do you do when black is white, up is down, day is night, and the order followers don't challenge that? Did the congressional reps dispute that, even looking at the dead trees themselves? No, because they're order followers as well. Did Congressman Doug LaMalfa, when I, at one weekly town hall meeting, confronted him with the fact that massive amounts of heavy metal are falling on us, and his office has done nothing, he said, give me a source of that that's credible and I'll do something. The very next week, this is on film. You can look up geoengineeringwatch.org confronting a congressman. You can see this 4-minute film. I handed to Congressman Doug LaMalfa testing data from California EPA. The very next week, you can see it on film. What did he and his office do? They said, we don't recognize this as credible data. Where do you go with that? What do they recognize as credible data? This is what we have, order followers. Again, our system is full of such people. And unless the rest of us hold those people accountable, none of us are going to be around long. That's a mathematical fact. Think about that. Let's look at the aluminum and the water that I brought up to LaMalfa. What has happened since that time? Here's a headline from February 18th from the Northern California primary newspaper, the Record Searchlight. The salmon, the winter run of salmon that were put in the Sacramento River last fall, 97% of those salmon died before they reached the very next town downriver. 97% before they even got to the next town. Obviously, none of them made it to the ocean. Obviously. Now, they blame this on warm water, and warm water is a problem. Absolutely, it's a problem. The planet's in total meltdown. But there's other problems that are not being acknowledged. Let's go back to the aluminum. I've stated in previous shows. I'll state it again. I've been in the testing agency office that tests water in the Sacramento River, shown tests that the river is full of aluminum, spikes of aluminum that they have still not disclosed. I have emails in my possession from one of the California state biologists who is testing on the Sacramento River smelt, another huge environmental issue with a fish that's endangered. I have his emails confirming that those fish have aluminum on their gills. I have not heard from this biologist for some time because he said he was being hammered for trying to bring this data out. More order followers, yes? More order followers above him, trying to beat down this man who is trying to tell the truth. Another fish and game biologist from Redding, whom I know personally, is now retired because she couldn't take it anymore, being beat down because if she tried to bring up geoengineering or the aluminum that was showing up everywhere, she was beaten down. So everybody just toes the line, the order followers, while the ship goes to the bottom. And that's exactly where it's going. Thankfully, I retained these emails from the state biologist that our attorneys may put to use soon as the filings in Canada and the US proceed. Canada likely very soon, US not far behind. It takes a great deal of time to put this together. It's taken longer than we had hoped, but it's coming. Now, in regard to what else is in the rain, and again, aluminum is in the rain, period. We have about 5 dozen lab tests in Northern California alone to prove that. There's no speculation. It's not theory. It's not conjecture. It's fact. It's absolute fact. We have the testing data to prove it. It's not just aluminum, though. It's barium, strontium, manganese. They just shut down drinking fountains in Ashland, Oregon, because the water's full of barium. They don't know why. Why don't they know why? Because no one will acknowledge the elephant in the room, just like Congressman LaMalfa would not acknowledge the elephant in the room, or the testing data, or the aluminum tests off the side of Mount Shasta, snow off the side of what is claimed to be a pristine water source, snow with 61,000 parts per billion of aluminum in the snow, highly toxic snow. And that material is not coming from the strata below, it's on the snow on top. It has to come from the sky. It's in the precipitation. That's why we've always relied on precipitation tests, because they can't be argued. Now let's add something else to the mix. Mercury. New article released from Scientific American. Headline. Here's the headline. Mercury splatters the central U.S. Continuing from this report, rainfall in the Rocky Mountains shows a surprisingly high amount of mercury, worrying scientists about what's to come. The only time you hear a story like this is when they can't hide it any longer. So now let's combine these two metals, aluminum and mercury. We know aluminum's in the rain. We now know mercury's in the rain. A lot of sources of mercury that we know of. We know it's coming from the coal-fired power plants, which is what those in power and agencies want to blame everything on. But is that reality? It's not reality. Because in the case of aluminum, we know it's not migrating from China on the West Coast, because California Air Resources Board has proven that with their studies. Mercury can, but aluminum can't. So where's the aluminum coming from that surfaced in such massive quantities in the last 10 plus years? Where's that coming from? It matches climate engineering patents exactly. The amount of sun being blocked from whatever's coming out of these aircraft is immense. We know that. I know that. I'm off grid. That's my background. I can lose 60, 70, 80% of my solar power on certain days from whatever these aircraft are emitting. And if you think that's from condensation, you're living in an alternate reality. It's not. So now we have aluminum being sprayed in our skies. And in fact, coal fly ash, a waste product, we think, because the chemical signature is close to what the testing shows, may be a base material that's being sprayed on us. Why would that be so advantageous for those in power? One, because they have a great deal of it. They have great quantities of this material, so it would be available for them to spray on such a massive scale. And two, it gives them plausible deniability. They can claim it's all coming from the coal plants, not the aircraft we see spraying above our heads, but from the coal plants. So it gives them plausible deniability. So now we have, bottom line, New Scientific American article, confirming that we not only have aluminum coming down on us, we have mercury, and it's showing up everywhere, by the way. So what happens when you combine those two metals, aluminum and mercury? Synergistic toxicity occurs. Those two metals, there's peer-reviewed study to confirm that when those two metals are combined, toxicity can increase as much as 10,000%. That's 100 times more. That's what's raining down on you. That's what we're all breathing. If you don't believe it, you will as your health deteriorates. Let's move on to some more issues. About the warmer water I talked about in the Sacramento River. Where's El Nino? We have the warmest El Nino conditions ever. Where is El Nino that was predicted for us? As I stated before the El Nino progressed, almost a year ago, I stated El Nino was forming. They couldn't suppress it anymore, but that didn't mean that they couldn't keep the rain shut off. I stated it on the record. It's on geoengineeringwatch.org. I just reposted that article as a link in another article. They can and are determining how much it rains and how toxic that rain is. That's the power the geoengineers have over all of us. So whatever else is going on, whatever else people are working on around the globe, whatever other challenges, political, elections, none of it matters. None of it matters. If we don't deal with what they're doing in our skies, none of it will matter. Another issue, the next engineered snowstorm to follow record-shattering high temperatures all over the country. We just had what the Weather Channel trumped up as dangerous cold all over the East Coast, and we had record high temperatures, in some cases less than a day afterward. If that doesn't strike you as being completely unnatural, again, you're in an alternate reality. These storms are being engineered with chemical ice nucleation. There's no question about that. The snow tests prove it. Massive weather whiplash, a term we've used on Geoengineering Watch repeatedly for a very long time. Weather Channel's now using this term as well because you can't hide it any longer. You can't hide that kind of fluctuation. And how big were some of the fluctuations? Some locations on the East Coast went from, think about this, in New York, some locations went from negative 26 to 59 degrees. 50 degrees, from negative 26 to 50 degrees above in less than a day. A 76 degrees change in less than a day. If you think that's natural, you need to recheck your reality. Particles in the atmosphere have a profound impact on weather, especially precipitation. This is scientifically indisputable. So for those who don't think the climate can be manipulated, you are completely and totally incorrect. Do some research. Have a basis on which your opinion is built. Not what you feel, not what your inclination is because of some headline you saw. Do some actual research. Let's carry the insanity a little bit further, because as the atmosphere is destroyed again, technology that so many worship, that so many don't question the quote-unquote experts, what they're doing, is it really good? We have noctilucent clouds or nacreous clouds or polar stratospheric clouds appearing all over the globe in latitudes that are much further away from the poles than they should be. This is methane buildup. This is also likely a harbinger of, again, Project Lucien Alamo, projects that we have scientific data on that we believe are going on already, that are using massively powerful ground-based radio frequency transmitters like HAARP, but there's many more around the globe, many within urban areas, that are microwaving the atmosphere to try to degrade the methane that's building up in the atmosphere. Methane that's being released from frozen methane deposits in tundra and on the seafloor. Methane clathrates and methane hydrates that climate engineering is making worse overall, not better. Climate engineering is fueling this fire. And again, climate engineering, again, is weather warfare, which is biological warfare. So we see nighttime low temperatures going up twice as fast as daytime highs. So as the administration and those in power become ever more desperate because of this disintegration, a little over a week ago, we had a major Supreme Court decision that completely overturned the current administration's climate legislation. A lot of people know about the dead Supreme Court justice, but did they know about the fact that there was just a critical vote that stopped this administration's climate legislation in its tracks? And I would argue there's much more to it besides what we see at face value on the climate legislation. There's geoengineering behind the scenes. We have the military training right now for training exercises that are centered around a climate and societal implosion. Connect these dots. Connect all the dots. So this Supreme Court justice dies very suspiciously days after this vote, and now the whole legislation format that was overturned is now back in play. Just a coincidence? I don't think so. And again, it's not just about Obama at all. He's just a puppet in the play, just like Bush was and just like Clinton and the rest. These are bad people, all of them, but there's much more powerful people behind the curtain. So in trying to get this out, back to our weather, our atmosphere, the El Nino that's not bringing the rain to Northern California in spite of all the predictions and even predictions by our local meteorologists, I just want to finish this off. As I've gone over the last two shows, I've, for a third time, sent a formal invitation to KRCR, Chief Meteorologist Mike Kruger, and also the news anchor Mike Mangus, to please address the public's concerns in a town hall forum. Sent them a number of data sets, also again in the last week, cloud formations that are inarguably completely unnatural, congressional documents, military documents owning the weather. Doesn't matter what I send, they don't respond to anything because that's what they're paid to do, not respond. So on that note, I want to point out an experiment called the Milgram experiment. We've gone over Stockholm Syndrome in the past. Let's look at the Milgram experiment. What makes people do what they do? What makes the order followers so conforming, regardless of the consequences? The Milgram experiment explains. I'll read. This is directly from Wikipedia. The Milgram experiment on obedience to authority figures was a series of social psychological experiments conducted by Yale University psychologist Stanley Milgram. They measured the willingness of study participants, mostly young male students from Yale, to obey an authority figure who instructed them to perform acts conflicting with their personal conscience. The experiment found, unexpectedly, that a very high proportion of people were prepared to obey, albeit unwillingly, even if their cooperation caused serious injury and distress to others. Milgram first described his research in 1963 in an article published in the Journal of Abnormal and Social Psychology. Now, the experiments began in July of '61 in the basement of a hall at Yale University, 3 months after the start of the trial of the German Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. Milgram devised his psychological study to answer the popular question at that particular time. Could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? The order followers, right? How do terrible things happen? Because people simply follow orders. I remember when I first really learned about the Holocaust, I wondered, how could that possibly happen? How could so many people be so willfully blind? I know now. I absolutely know. After 12 years in this battle and trying to share, having film footage of what's happening in our skies, lab tests, it doesn't matter. Congressional documents, Senate documents, patents, it doesn't matter. Those who don't want to know the truth will not accept it, period. Thus we have the experiment in question. Those who follow orders, even if it harms others. The experiments have been repeated many times in the following years with consistent results, even in differing societies. It's very profound that people will ignore their sense of conscience and follow orders. That's why we are in such a dark place. Now, to point this out, to give an example of this, I want to cover a report on the fracking industry. This is a report by Claire Burnish, very recent report from February 16th. This is important not just because of the dangers from the fracking itself, but it's a massive example of the order following and how insane it is and how it will lead to our short-term extinction on this planet. The report starts, though the fracking industry proponents scoff at any intimidation their so-called vital industry possesses, even scant risks to the public. A new study published in Toxicology and Applied Pharmacology just proved those critics right. Fracking wastewater causes cancer. I'll repeat that. Fracking wastewater causes cancer. After conducting further tests on live mammalian subjects, researchers found 5 of 6 mice injected with cells from fracking water treatments developed tumors as early as 3 months after the injection, including a tumor in one mouse that grew to over 1 centimeter in size in just 5 months. A control group did not develop any tumors for the 6-month study period. According to the study performed by scientists from the Department of Environmental Medicine, results indicate fracking flowback water causes cancer. That's a pretty straightforward statement, isn't it? Fracking flowback water causes cancer. Why wouldn't it? Implications of the report's findings would be difficult to overstate. In other words, it is extremely dire. You can't state how dire it is. How fracking wastewater is generated, stored, and treated, and how often spills, leaks, and even wastewater injection processes itself can lead to contamination of the potable water supply. That's the epitome of order-following insanity. Let's just inject it into the ground and try to hide it, even if it contaminates groundwater forever. Order followers, human insanity. A concise but thorough explanation of the fracking process can be found in the introduction to the report, Malignant Human Cell Transformation of Marcellus Shale Gas Drilling Flowback Water, which states, natural gas is believed to possibly be a bridge to transitioning from coal dependence. Currently, natural gas fuels nearly 40% of the U.S. electricity generation, and the Marcellus Shale Formation in the Appalachian Basin is on the forefront of gas shale drilling for natural gas production in the United States. Mining natural gas is not new, but the volume has soared in recent years because of the new technology, new technique, worshiping technology, right? The experts, what are they really doing for us? Of high-volume horizontal hydraulic fracturing. The concern surrounding the environmental, public health, and social impacts of this method has increased accordingly. HVHF, that's the hydraulic fracturing technology, is an advanced technology that injects water, sand, and other ingredients. You see how they hide the real ingredients? Water and sand, that sounds very benign, and other ingredients. How about over 500 highly toxic chemicals, and they just show it as other ingredients? That's the world we live in. Order followers who get away with not telling any truth with something that dire. Injects these ingredients at very high pressure vertically into a well about 6,000 to 10,000 feet deep. The high pressure creates fractures in the rock that extend out as far as 1,000 feet away from the well. The pressure is reduced after the fractures are created, which allows the water from the well to return to the surface. Everything, much of what they inject, all these chemicals come right back to the top. Huge amounts of chemicals and water, about 5.5 million gallons for each well. Think about that. 5.5 million highly toxic gallons of water flows back to the surface. The options for dealing with this flowback are limited, the report continues. Current discharge options of flowback water are inject underground through an on-site or off-site disposal well. Sounds very sterile, doesn't it? A disposal well. That water's not contained underground. It infiltrates other water aquifers within surrounding areas. This whole scenario of this quest for energy and to keep this current paradigm going is literally killing us. How hard is that to see? And climate engineering, again, plugging into fracking, it's all in the same realm of insanity. All of it is. And yet we have a population that wants to simply sit on a couch and watch football games. I hate to keep picking on the football fans. There's a lot of other people I could pick on and should pick on. But whatever you're doing, if you're ignoring what's happening, you're contributing. If you're looking the other way, you're contributing. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. And this is that time. So if we're not concerned about this, the report continues, the metal pollution is a serious problem as they are taken up readily in the digestive tract and exhibit harmful effects on many tissues. Barium and strontium are abundant in the Marcellus Shale Formation, so it's in the blowback water, 5.5 million gallons per well, and are easily dissolved and transported in wastewater after gas drilling activity. And then it says, which could potentially pose a threat to drinking water. Now, if we know these elements are toxic, why would we say they could potentially pose a threat? That's like saying if you jump in front of a semi going 70 miles an hour, you could potentially get hurt. How ridiculous are these statements? And people accept this. And it takes a scientist to tell us that? Really? That's what we're paying the quote-unquote experts for? Finishing this report, in fact, in 2014, environmental consulting firm Downstream Strategies diligently attempted to track fracking water from the Marcellus Shale, both water withdrawn from sources for use in the process as well as wastewater, but found it to be impossible. In other words, they have no idea where this water is going. No idea what these companies are doing with this highly toxic water. The bottom line is this: why would we be surprised? Why would we be surprised that this is business as usual on every front? And the largest scale example we have of this is climate engineering. Think about the stated goal of people like David Keith, Dr. David Keith from Harvard University, who I confronted at an international geoengineering conference. And anybody can see this confrontation if you search Dane Wigington, David Keith. And you can see David Keith caught like a deer in the headlights when, again, asked why he had not addressed the human toxicological effects, environmental toxicity. He had no answer. In fact, this was his answer to me and to the rest of the room, and it's on film and on the record. Have we actually studied the toxicological effects? No. Could terrible things happen tomorrow? We don't know. Back to the order followers, just like David Keith, doing whatever he's told. No regard for the consequences, no regard for whom it hurts. Is this not criminal behavior? Completely criminal? Shouldn't these people be on trial? When we have those that will participate in this kind of experimentation, and geoengineer Ken Caldeira from Stanford University, no different. I have an audio tape of geoengineer Ken Caldeira on the record stating what he did at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory was sit around and try to decide how they could spray pathogens into the clouds to affect the population below. How can a man like that look himself in the mirror? I don't know. I really don't know. I've communicated a little bit with Ken Caldeira when he became alarmed that people were posting his address everywhere and was worried about his family. How worried about his family could he possibly be? What kind of a man like that even deserves to have a family? He deserves to be behind bars. Or perhaps after a trial, maybe something worse. These are the kind of people that are carrying out these atrocities. These are the quote experts. These are the scientists. These are the order followers that our society is worshiping. And they worship the technology that these kinds of people come up with. And a society that worships these kinds of people and this kind of technology won't be around long. That's exactly where we're heading. We won't be around long on this trajectory unless we focus on what we should focus on. So the fracking, which has been touted as some societal saving endeavor, is actually killing us, literally, irreparably. You can't fix this groundwater once it's contaminated in any time frame that matters. This won't rectify itself for millions of years, at best. The depleted uranium ammunition that our own army is using against our own troops. Again, when you criticize the government, people assume you're criticizing our troops. I had my photographs taken, as I've stated before, when I passed out 200 commercial copies of a film called Hidden Wars of Desert Storm, which I would encourage everybody to watch. Award-winning international film that documented how our own troops were contaminated by our own military, the Pentagon, with highly radioactive ammunition. And I was photographed from every angle, from undercover police, the night before the second Iraq war started, when I was handing these tapes out, as if I was some kind of a terrorist or a criminal. This is the kind of order followers that we live with. Same theme, order followers. Right and wrong is not a part of their equation at all, because that's how our society has been trained. Just do what you're told. What kind of society is that to live in? It's a society that is doomed to die, period. Doomed to die. That's the course we're on. The sooner we realize it, the better. And let's give one more example of this, just one more example. Because I'm asked all the time, Why would the proverbial they, and who are the they, by the way, that are really behind all of this? It's those who control the money, the central bankers, the core group of power that are above elected officials, that control armies. That's who the they is. So I'm asked, why would, quote, they do this to themselves? How many examples do we need of those in power doing this to themselves? So I've just given a number of examples. Let me give one more. We have Fukushima, as we know, that may kill us all if something else doesn't first. 3 reactors in full-blown meltdown. But as if that wasn't bad enough, we're building 60 more right now. Obama recently approved $6.5 billion for 2 new reactors in, I believe, Georgia. But here's recent headlines from Belgium, that with all the nuclear issues we have right now and all the contamination, Belgium is going to put back online reactors that are horribly, horribly dangerous. Here's a headline: Belgian nuclear reactors riddled with 16,000 unexplained cracks. This is from The Ecologist publication. 16,000 unexplained cracks in the reactor facility, and they're going to put this back online? Another headline: unplanned energy losses due to unplanned shutdowns. What happens with the cooling on those plants? Europe's aging nuclear reactors. This is another headline: Europe's aging nuclear reactors must have an environmental assessment. You think? Really? I mean, wouldn't we inspect these worn out reactors before we put them online? Why in the world would we put them online under any circumstances? And again, another headline about Belgium: Belgium's aging nuclear plants worry neighbors. That's from BBC. I wonder why. There's only 16,000 cracks in the reactors. We're not dealing with sanity. We're dealing with people that are insane at the top and people who blindly follow orders the rest of the way down the line. That's what we're dealing with. The bottom line is this: we're facing not just climate change, we're facing an abrupt climate shift. I'm saying that on the record because all available data indicates that's exactly what we're going through. Our reality is going to change at blinding speed. It's not about Al Gore, it's not about carbon credits or any of that sort of profiteering. It's about reality. And you can't legitimately discuss, for all those environmentalists who want to ignore climate engineering, you can't legitimately discuss climate or weather without first and foremost including geoengineering and solar radiation management. We should all make lists of meteorologists and agencies officials, their official contacts. Make lists of their contacts and consistently mail information to them and keep track of those mails so that we can hold them accountable once geoengineering is out in the open and they can't say, gee, I didn't know. Make lists, send out information to these people. Why won't media tell the truth? Because they're paid not to. And those that dare meet with an untimely end. Saudi Arabia, by the way, just killed 2 Yemenis journalists that were trying to report on Saudi Arabia's tyranny. And journalists are being killed in record numbers around the globe right now, by the way. Remember the Weather Channel meteorologist who just committed suicide in a very suspect way. For example, we have the recent Supreme Court judge. Last year we had a number of Arctic scientists that died very untimely deaths, and we had a major Arctic scientist, Peter Wedhams, who stated initially on the record that he felt that they were taken out. He has since retracted that because he's probably been threatened. But if things weren't this bad, why would we have National Weather Service and no employees under a federal gag order, period? In closing, I want to read something from John Hollowhorn of the Oglala Lakota tribe. Listen to this, because the Native Americans saw from so far away what was coming. This is a quote from John Hollowhorn. "Someday the earth will weep. She will beg for her life. She will cry with tears of blood. You will make a choice if you will help her or you will let her die. And when she dies, you too will die." So early on, and from such a great distance in time, the Native Americans saw what was coming. They recognized the propensity of dominant cultures to exploit and plunder everything in their path. The human race, for the most part, is completely asleep at the wheel. Taken as a whole, we're like a suicide jumper from the 100th floor. We're passing the 2nd floor now, and we still think we're flying and not falling. Make a decision to be a part of the cure, not the disease. Make a decision to make your voice heard for the common good while there's yet time to make a difference for the better. At geoengineeringwatch.org, on the homepage in the upper left, we have activist suggestions column and the flaming arrow link. both giving instructions as to how you can help sound the alarm for the common good, how you can help expose the insanity, instructions as to how you can help change the direction of the Titanic on which we are all currently passengers. Make the decision to make your voice heard. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.